Okay, so we're going to continue on with our nozzle here. The primer is pretty well dry. I might, if this was a normal kit, normal build, I might wait another 30 minutes or so, but I'm going to go ahead and put on the next coat. And for this coat, we're going to use some good Tamiya XF56, which is metallic gray. And that's going to be kind of the base that we're going to work off of from there on out. So, get this shook up. You hear the clicking noise while I'm shaking this. I put a ball bearing in the bottom of all of my paints, and it just helps mix up the paint a little bit. Nice and tight. Okay, so you don't need a whole lot of paint. So I have one of these little, they're really kind of a metal stir stick, but I use them to transport paint from the bottle over to the airbrush when I'm only going to need a little bit. So that's going to look something like this. Unfortunately, you can't see it very well. Okay, that should be enough. I always place my airbrush back in its holder, which is a spray out tub, and I always put the lid back on the paint. I have never spilt a drop of paint with the lid on. And this lid's a little bit dirty, so it makes it kind of tough to get back on here. Okay, lid's back on the paint. And we're going to hit a little bit of XF56 metallic gray on this nozzle. Okay, we pretty well got it coated. Looks pretty good. Now, there was a time in my life when I would have said, okay, I'm done, but not yet. All right, so now we'll clean out our airbrush. While that dries, the Tamiya paints seem to dry quite a bit faster than the primer, and that's good. I used to tear my airbrush down and clean it thoroughly after each color. But I decided I really didn't need to do that anymore, so I just clean out the cup really well. If I'm going to switch to an entirely new color, I take out the needle and I actually shoot alcohol through this back opening here, and it'll go all the way through the airbrush, through the cup, and out through the nozzle, and it gets all paint residue out. And that's a really good thing to do, especially if you're going from a darker color to a lighter color. So this is coming along well. It's drying pretty fast. So let's see how we're doing here. Yeah, it's a little bit tacky, which I could go ahead and paint now if I wanted to, but I'm going to let it set for just another minute. And we will be right back. Okay, so we're ready for the next step. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put a really light coat, a quick coat of flat black on this nozzle. So we're not going to need a lot of flat black. Drop or two will do it. Okay, get the top back on this flat black bottle. And we're just going to hit the outside of this and maybe the inside. That just tones it down a little bit. It still has that metallic flavor to it, but it tones it down a little bit. Okay, so now we'll clean out this airbrush. And you can see, well, I don't know where you can see, but there's almost no paint left in there because I didn't use any hardly. Maybe 2 drops was all I needed. Okay, now we're ready for the secret ingredient number 1 for this burner can. If you remember when we looked at the can that I did yesterday, it's got that nice tan look on the inside, and that is characteristic of this type of metal, that when it gets abused by a lot of heat, it kind of goes tan instead of black. And it's very interesting. The first time I started noticing this was at an air show, and I started looking at the inside of these veins, and they were sort of a dirty brown, or tan, and I was really amazed that it did that. I mean, I thought it would be black. Well, there's a tremendous amount of heat that's coming out of this nozzle, way more than what you would see like in a passenger airliner or something like that. And it really abuses that metal and turns it kind of a tan. You'll notice almost exactly the same thing on like a Hellcat, an F6F Hellcat from World War II. If you look at the fuselage right next to where the exhausts are coming out, there's kind of a brown tone right there. And that's a nice little detail to add to an overall blue Hellcat. It really makes it pop in that area. Okay, so now what we're going to do now is we're going to paint the inside of this nozzle with a little bit of light brown XF93. It says DAC 1942, but you're just looking for a color kind of like that. If you have another color, if you don't have XF93, you don't have to put your project on hold. You're just looking for kind of a tan, because that is really going to be your base coat anyway on the inside. You're going to do a couple of other things after you get that applied to finish off that inside of that nozzle. So we'll put a little paint in our cup here. Just a little bit, only need a drop or 2. All right. I'm gonna move this F-16 because I'm gonna get paint on it as sure as the world. Set him up there. Okay. All right, so we have our paint loaded, and we're just going to concentrate on the inside of this nozzle, and I'll show you what it looks like when we get done. Okay, so now we have a nice tan on the inside of that nozzle. And kind of overdid it a little bit, but that doesn't really matter. We're going to let that dry for a couple minutes, and then we're going to show you what we're going to do next. Or then I'm going to show you. Nobody else actually in here. Is there? Hello? Nope. I'm just all by myself. Okay, so now we're ready for one of the secret ingredients, if you will, and that is a nice wash on the inside of that nozzle. The last time I did this, I used Tamiya Panaline Accent Color Dark Brown, and it worked out great. No problems with it. It is a lacquer based or oil based, so you can get it all over the acrylic and wipe it off with mineral spirits, and it's not an issue. In the case of the can that I did earlier, I actually just rubbed it in with a Q-tip after I got it on. This time, though, I'm going to try this line wash from Ammo that's a dark brown. Should be the same stuff. I mean, it should give me the same result. Shake it up real good. It's really thin. For those of you that are not familiar, a wash is basically a color that is extremely thin, and it tends to run. You can touch like a panel line, and it'll just follow that panel line down, and it gives that panel line a really nice demarcation. And it also helps dirty up your models for a little bit of realism. So I've got this little disposable brush here, and I'm going to see what we can do with this. So if you look, there's flats and there are grooves. It's kind of hard to see. There you go. There's flats and there are grooves, and I'm going to work in the grooves. Just touch that in that groove. I'm going to wipe it down through that groove. I think that's going to work better. So we're doing two things. We're making that brown darker, and we're giving it a little bit of an oily look. Jet fuel is a very refined kerosene, so it is kind of an oily based fuel. And so it does have some oily deposits. And then it picks up dirt really well. Okay, so there we have all of that mixed in. Now we're going to take a clean Q-tip, and we're going to work that around, except that's not going to work because it's taking my paint off. Obviously, this is not lacquer based. So we'll switch gears here. And we're going to go right back to our trusty Tamiya. That's not going to bother that nozzle any. Okay, so now you can kind of see we have kind of a dirty brown. So we're going to do one more step here before we call this good. Actually, a couple more steps. We're going to use some of this shader, and that works really well on flat paints. In fact, that's one of the things it recommends, is that you use flat paint, or use it on flat paints before you gloss coat. I'm just going to put a little bit in there. Again, this is a really thin paint, And one of the cool things about shaders is you can hit like around an engine bay area around like a reciprocating motor, and it'll, when it's wet, it'll just spread out, and that makes it look like oil that has leaked. So we'll hit it with some of this shader. Okay, let me clean this out real quick. Okay, so there we've got our shaded engine nozzle. Now you can see where I wiped some of the paint off right there. That was my mistake. I'd have to redo that if I was going to keep this nozzle. But you have a really nice brown nozzle on the inside. I kind of rushed through this. You guys will do a much better job than I will. I'm quite certain of it. Okay. We're going to do one more thing here. Actually, two more things. Okay, this is a drafting pen, and it is acrylic based, but it comes to a really fine point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow each one of those lines down in that outside vein and just kind of demarcate that a little bit. Just like that. Then I'm going to take my flat black get just a teeny bit on my brush and then basically wipe most of that off. And we're going to do a little dry brushing in the area that is visible on that nozzle. Okay. Last step. This is more Tamiya accent line, panel line accent color. And we're just going to do the very tip of this exhaust nozzle on the outside. Going to go in there kind of heavy. Okay. Q-tip, kind of spread the love here. That'll help the outside of that nozzle look a little bit more, or a little bit dirtier. It's got a lot of sheen to it, but that'll go away as this panel line dries. You can always hit it with a flat coat if it doesn't. But that's kind of how you do that nozzle. Maybe your most important takeaway from this would be that the inside of that nozzle should not be black. It should not be jet black. It should not be any of those black colors. It should be kind of a brown. And if you don't believe me, just look around at your next air show, and you might be amazed. But anyway, that's it from the hangar deck today. It was an awfully long video. I'm sorry about that, but that's the way it goes sometimes. Everybody take care, and we'll see you next time.